Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of The People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is January 7th, 2026. Should climate change be measured in dollars or lives? How much is the U.S. military giving to war profiteers on behalf of Taiwan? What is actually going on in Yemen? What does NATO have to say about U.S. interests in Greenland? Would you give up your biometrics just to enter the United States? What is the Donroe Doctrine? And how is it being applied to Venezuela? How is American capital still abusing Indigenous Americans? What type of person is ICE trying to recruit? If the US wants to redevelop Gaza into a smart city, why haven't they consulted the Palestinians who still live there? What terror bombings has Palantir already committed? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps in the episode description.
Well, don't feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
Top 10 climate disasters cost the planet $122 billion, with one continent hit the hardest. December 30th, 2025, via The Independent. Climate disasters cost the world more than $120 billion in 2025, with the true toll expected to be far higher as the deadliest events in poorer countries were largely uninsured and undercounted, a new analysis has found. The review of extreme weather events this year shows that Asia accounted for 4 of the 6 most expensive climate disasters of 2025. Many of the deadliest disasters elsewhere did not feature among the costliest events because those financial losses were not insured. The analysis, carried out by the charity Christian Aid, identified 10 climate-related disasters that each caused more than $1 billion in damage, with combined losses exceeding $122 billion. Most of the figures are based on insured losses, which tend to be highest in wealthier countries with high property values and more widespread insurance coverage. In the United States, wildfires in California caused more than $60 billion in damage and were linked to more than 400 deaths, making them the single costliest disaster of the year. Asia, however, dominated the list overall. Cyclones and flooding across South and Southeast Asia in November caused an estimated $25 billion in damage, killed more than 1,750 people across Thailand, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and Malaysia. Flooding in China cost $11.7 billion in losses and killed at least 30 people, while floods and landslides across India and Pakistan killed more than 1,860 people and affected millions. Typhoons in the Philippines caused more than $5 billion in damage and displaced over 1.4 million people. In many poorer countries, disasters with severe humanitarian consequences did not appear in global cost rankings at all. Flooding in Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of the Congo killed hundreds of people, while a prolonged drought across Iran and West Asia left up to 10 million people in Tehran facing the prospect of evacuation because of water shortages. While wealthy nations count the financial cost of disasters, millions of people across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean are counting lost lives, homes, and futures, said Mohamed Addo, the director of the Nairobi-based climate think tank PowerShift Africa. These disasters are not natural, they are the inevitable result of continued fossil fuel expansion and political delay, said Joanna Hay, emeritus professor at the atmospheric physics at the Imperial College in London. While the costs run into the billions, the heaviest burden falls on the communities with the least resources to recover. The findings come after EU's climate and space agency Copernicus said this month that 2025 is set to be the world's second or third warmest on record, potentially surpassed only by 2024's record-breaking heat. According to the World Meteorological Organization, the last 10 years have been the 10 warmest years since records began. At the same time, global emissions have continued to rise, driven largely by the burning of coal, oil, and gas, even as renewable energy capacity has expanded rapidly. That additional heat is intensifying extreme weather, according to scientists. Most of the major disasters this year were found to have been intensified due to the climate crisis. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, increasing the risk of heavier rainfall and flooding, while hotter and drier conditions are worsening heat waves, droughts, and wildfire seasons. Oceans have also remained unusually warm, contributing to stronger storms and widespread coral bleaching. Wildfires across Spain and Portugal followed prolonged and record-breaking heat, while flooding across South Asia and China came after unusually intense monsoon rainfall. In Scotland, extreme temperatures fueled wildfires in the Highlands, burning more than 47,000 hectares. Capitalism counts insured property, not human life. The reported $120 billion in climate disaster losses drastically understates reality because global accounting prioritizes insured damage in wealthy countries, while mass death, displacement, and suffering in poorer nations go uncounted. This exposes a system that values private property and profit over human life. Climate catastrophe is concentrated where exploitation is deepest. The deadliest disasters hit the global south, South and Southeast Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, regions historically plundered by colonialism and still locked into extractive global markets. These communities face the worst impacts despite contributing least to the climate crisis and having the fewest resources to recover. This article was enlightening, I guess, in a lot of ways. Most telling, I think, is the opinion of the writer itself, who described the wildfires in California as being the costliest disaster of the year, as the result of $60 billion in damage and 400 deaths. I mean, 400 people is a lot of people, especially for a fire. Don't get me wrong, but the single costliest disaster, because it had the highest cost, was that of monetary value, capital. While the very next disaster it lists killed over 1,700 people. The next one, 1,800 people. And then in the Philippines, 1.4 million people displaced. But the costliest to this was the only cost tabled at all, calculated, considered, valued whatsoever, is monetary cost. The lives of people in Sri Lanka and Vietnam and Malaysia and China, Indonesia, or Thailand, their lives straight up do not matter as much as an American person's physical property. And this is no unique thing to this article. This is quite literally how the United States and how the West operates at large. The lives of people in the global South, the lives of people in the oppressed nations, do not matter as much as capital in the imperial core. The monetary value of things, of items, of belongings is always higher, valued higher than the actual value of a human life, especially when those lives are non-white, poor. And so, they're calculating all of this cost, all of this destruction based on insurance, which luckily, as the article points out, is not a really good way to table it, because so much destruction is just straight up uninsured. But then they go on to, value property over human lives. It's appalling. And, the drought in West and Central Asia left 10 million people in Tehran alone with water shortages and with water insecurity. But, the costliest disaster was a bunch of burned down buildings in Los Angeles. So, but like I said, this is how the U.S. operates. And this is how we got into this disaster in the first place. The profits accumulated through the burning of oil, gas, and coal, and the burning of these fossil fuels and the extraction of them and sale of them. That capital generated by this process, by this industry, is always going to be considered more valuable by the capitalists than the lives of people who get ruined by these, whether it be the miners and the extractive employees themselves, whether it be people who get poisoned in cities from exhaust, people whose crops get destroyed in gas leaks or by being bought out by gas drillers, the coral reefs, and being destroyed either by changing water temperatures or by oil spills, etc., etc. The costs of doing business, to many of these, this is straight up the cost of doing business, but the costs to people's lives and their quality of life, their health, their safety, their access to the most essential needs, is always considered to be less valuable than the profits that can be made through the consistent extraction and burning of fossil fuels. So climate change, we know, is man-made. It's not a natural phenomenon. It's being driven by human behavior, by capitalist profits, most essentially. The number one polluter in the world is the United States military. Climate change has gotten worse, measurably worse, simply due to the catastrophic and genocidal bombing of Gaza, all sponsored by U.S. tax dollars and U.S. politicians gleefully killing people in the global south. And, not to mention the fact that Gaza stands on the cusp of access to billions of barrels of oil. If I remember correctly, 17 billion barrels of oil and natural gas right off the coast is the projected estimates coming from those proposed oil fields. So all of this murder, this slaughter, both deliberate and accidental or incidental through the changing climate, is in the pursuit of profits. And imperial super profits are, at the end of the day, the only thing that the United States government, that world leaders, Western world leaders in particular, care about. And that value, this is entirely based on our Western culture and our American society especially. This is not innate to human nature. Human nature does not inherently value profits over other people. Most cultures, you probably, if you're watching this, you probably don't, but even people who wouldn't watch this show, generally speaking, would not value profits over a human being that they know and love. But you make that human being a stranger, you make them even more of a stranger through different skin color, different language, different culture, customs, and religion. And they're more than willing to see them die to preserve oil profits or to preserve their way of life. The people of the global south suffer expressly so that way Westerners can live happier and more comfortable lives. And even oppressed people within the United States are richer and better off, almost always, than the oppressed peoples in the global south, who are exploited, brutalized, and abused, their land poisoned and burned, their atmosphere polluted, their waters polluted, all in order to make even the poorest of us in the West more comfortable, give us more consumer goods, and overall, we are the drivers of that exploitation because we're the ones who benefit from it. So just like in the article, our very society puts American catastrophe as the costliest catastrophe in the world, because while other people lose their lives, we lose our material wealth. If you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. U.S. awards Lockheed Martin contract for Taiwan Air Force gear, January 1st, 2026 via Taiwan News. Pentagon allocates $4.9 billion Taiwanese dollars up front. The U.S. Department of Defense said on Wednesday that it awarded Lockheed Martin a $10.3 billion military sales contract to supply equipment for Taiwan's Air Force, Reuters reported. At the time the contract was issued, the Pentagon allocated about $4.9 billion to begin the project, which is scheduled to continue through June 2031. The deal includes 55 Legion-enhanced infrared search and track sensor pods, along with related processors and containers. The announcement comes after China recently conducted large-scale military exercises around Taiwan. While the U.S. maintains formal diplomatic relations with China, it has long-standing unofficial ties with Taiwan and is the country's primary arms supplier. China considers Taiwan part of its territory and has never ruled out using force to assert control, a claim Taiwan rejects. U.S. law requires Washington to help Taiwan maintain the ability to defend itself. According to a report submitted to Taiwan's legislature on November 3rd, 25 foreign military sales cases are currently in progress, up from 18 in June. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense reported that as of November 30th, the value of U.S. arms sales approved in previous years but not yet delivered totaled $776 billion, according to Taiwan's Security Monitor. Mao Zedong recognized that Taiwan was a Western puppet, and he very famously said that in order to counter both the rising tide of the Chinese independence and of Arab independence, the United States, or the West in general, created two adversaries. They created Israel to destroy the Arabs, and Formosa, Taiwan, to destroy the Chinese. And I think that in both cases, he has been proven to be absolutely correct. But what's interesting is that it is officially United States policy that Taiwan is China, that Taiwan belongs to mainland China, that Taiwan is not an independent country, that Taiwan is not intended to be an independent country. Of course, our behavior does not reflect our actual foreign policy, and there are some arguments to be made as to why we did that in the first place. It's to get access to Chinese markets and whatnot, and Chinese goods, one of the agreements, but it's part of their one China policy, where all of the provinces of China are equally part of China. So, that's a fun fact about U.S. foreign policies. We do officially recognize Taiwan as part of China. And what's interesting is, so does Taiwan. Taiwan also recognizes, or does not even really recognize its own independence. It recognizes it as being a part of China. The difference, however, is that whereas Beijing sees Taiwan as being part of Beijing, we'll say it that way, Taiwan sees Beijing as being part of Taiwan. So it's at they believe that they both of them want to reunify China and unify Taiwan with mainland China, but Taiwan wants to do it under the United States by default, because Taiwan is of course a puppet of the United States, wants to unify China under the Taiwanese nationalist banner, whereas China itself wants to reintegrate Taiwan into the Chinese People's Republic. Of course, one can't really discuss this without pointing out that Taiwan was literally run by a fascist dictator for many years, who, upon landing on the island after losing the Chinese Civil War, wreaked havoc on the island and massacred hundreds of thousands of people. Chiang Kai-shek was a brutal dictator who was a fascist in all but name. He sucked so bad that his own generals basically had to beat him into submission to make him fight the Japanese, because he was totally disinterested in liberating China from the Japanese imperialist boot. He only wanted to fight the Reds, so his own generals had to kidnap him and beat the shit out of him until he realized that the real enemy was not the communists but the Japanese. And then once it was over, he went right back to it, but then lost. So, a point of clarity, though, for the article. I did say this, but I wanted to make sure that it's clear. All of the money discussed is in what they call new Taiwan dollars. So when we see that Lockheed Martin got a sales contract for $10.3 billion, that's 10.3 billion Taiwanese dollars, not US dollars. In US dollars, that's $328.5 million. So $328,500,000. So significantly less than if you initially heard 10.3 billion and understandably thought that was US dollars. So when the Pentagon is giving them almost $5 billion up front, that's 5 billion Taiwanese dollars, not US dollars. So go ahead and you can rewatch that section and do the conversion rates on your own, just so you know how much money we're giving. It's still $300 million. Honestly, we'll round that up. Oh no, 328 million. So we'll round that up to 330 million. Is certainly nothing to shake a stick at. That's still a lot of money in military sales, but it's not 10.3 billion US dollars. Just for clarification. So why is the United States doing this? Of course, like Mao said, it's to destroy China. The goal of the United States is the encirclement of China, and in order to coerce it and help force it into a catastrophic war that would hopefully be fought largely on Chinese soil and not on Western soil, thus giving the West an inherent advantage no matter how many losses we take, that our industries aren't going to be going. And honestly, just choking out China. It's part of the reason why we still have the ongoing military occupation of the South of Korea, and why the north of Korea is so ardently opposed to U.S. militarism. It's why we still occupy Japan. It's why we de facto occupy Taiwan, why Taiwan is our puppet and our colony, etc. And it's all about fighting China in order to destroy both an enemy of U.S. imperialism and U.S. hegemony at the very least, and to destroy socialism in the world. The United States is honestly probably more concerned with maintaining their hegemony over the world than they are with overtly destroying, say, socialism. A really clear example of this is, of course, their attack on Venezuela, rather than an attack on, say, Cuba, because they're interested in, monopolizing these, the natural resources and the world as a whole, and they prioritize that higher than actually combating socialism or communism, because that doesn't matter as much to the global Western elites, I guess is the way to put it, given that they already halfway won the Cold War. So that's what it's all about. That's why we're giving them all this money. It's in order to help draw China into a long, protracted war that's going to be costly and politically divisive. And much like what we saw with the United States goading Russia into a war with Ukraine and propping up Ukraine to take the hits for the West instead, burying as many Ukrainians as it takes to bleed out Russia. They're going to be doing the same thing with Taiwan. So, that's exactly how it's going to go down. If anything does happen, I don't think China's going to be as easy to pull as Russia, but I don't know. I've been wrong before. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Why Saudi Arabia and the UAE are now on opposite sides of Yemen conflict. December 30th, 2025 via The Independent. Riyadh strikes separatist forces backed by Abu Dhabi as conflict escalates again. Saudi Arabia conducted airstrikes early on Tuesday against Yemeni separatist forces backed by the UAE, adding to the complexity of the protracted conflict. The UAE was not until very long ago part of the Saudi-led coalition fighting the Houthis, who are aligned with their regional rival Iran and govern most of Yemen. The renewed fighting centers on the Southern Transitional Council, a separatist group backed by the UAE that controls parts of the southern Yemen. The STC has in recent days pushed into new areas, including the port city of Mukalla and Hadramaut, which had been held by the Saudi forces. Riyadh said these advances crossed a red line. On Tuesday, Saudi warplanes struck targets in Mukalla, claiming they were aimed at UAE weapons shipments for the STC. Riyadh said in a statement that the ships had switched off their tracking systems and unloaded arms and armored vehicles that posed an immediate threat. The crews had the disabled tracking devices aboard the vessels and unloaded a large amount of weapons and combat vehicles in support of the Southern Transitional Council's forces, it said. Considering that the aforementioned weapons constitute an imminent threat and an escalation that threatens peace and stability, the Coalition Air Force has conducted this morning a limited airstrike that targeted weapons and military vehicles offloaded from the two vessels in Mukalla. The STC voiced serious concern about the strikes, claiming they specifically targeted its elite units in Hadramaut, a strategic province bordering Saudi Arabia. Saudi officials stressed the strikes were carried out overnight to ensure no collateral damage occurred. The airstrikes mark a sharp escalation between Saudi Arabia and the STC and publicly expose growing friction between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi. The neighbors have backed different groups inside Yemen, despite being partners for much of the war against the Houthis. The Saudi Foreign Ministry directly warned the UAE over its role. Abu Dhabi's backing of the STC was extremely dangerous, it said, urging the neighboring country to take measures to preserve bilateral relations. Riyadh called the UAE's support for STC a threat to the kingdom's national security as well as to security and stability in the Republic of Yemen and in the region. In a separate statement, Riyadh said that its national security was a red line. Rashad al-Alimi, head of the Presidential Leadership Council, the executive body of Yemen's internationally recognized government opposed to the Houthis, canceled a joint defense agreement with the UAE, ordering all UAE forces to leave Yemen within 24 hours. Al Jazeera reported on Tuesday. He also declared a 72-hour air and naval blockade on all seaports and border crossings. This escalation in tensions indicates that Yemen's conflict is only deepening. In the south, the STC is expanding control in the Hadramawt and Al-Mara areas, which were largely spared from direct fighting for more than a decade. These regions are strategically important, holding the bulk of Yemen's oil reserves and key ports. Analysts warn the STC's rapid unilateral expansion risks provoking rival groups, deepening instability, and pushing the country towards a de facto partition. The STC, for its part, seeks to restore South Yemen as an independent state, reviving borders that existed before the country unified in 1990. Its supporters have recently flown the flag of southern Yemen and held demonstrations calling for secession. All right, so for those of you who haven't been paying attention to Yemen over the last 2 years, and for probably all of you who have and found it to be a confusing situation, that article is already out of date. So let me run through the very brief history of what's been going on. There are 3 factions, arguably 4, that are have kind of a 3 or 4-way civil war going on in Yemen that kind of starts in like 2011. They are Ansar Allah, which the article derogatorily refers to as the Houthis. They are a popular resistance movement to, of course, Western hegemony and colonial influence on their country. And they are the popular and, I would argue, legitimate governance of Yemen. The Ansar Allah party governs somewhere between 80 to 85% of the country and has since it started. The remaining 15 or so percent of the country is undergoing a 3-way civil war between Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which are 2 different groups that war against each other. I'm counting them as one for the sake of the argument. Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who are mostly defunct at this point, but still around. And then the Presidential Leadership Council, the PLC, backed by Saudi Arabia, and the Southern Transitional Council, backed by the UAE. The Southern Transitional Council, like the article says, seeks to recreate the independence of, or the country of South Yemen. Now, South Yemen was a communist country. And so, but anyone who's getting too excited about that, understand that they're not looking to reestablish communist Yemen. They're looking to recreate an independent South Yemen, a new country named after the old, but not in any way inspired by it. Now, part of the reason why they get this movement has been popular is because so many people who were living in South Yemen, which again is like 15 to 20% of the population, have very, very fond memories and nostalgia for communist Yemen. And that popular memory has goaded them into wanting to back an independent South Yemen. Unfortunately, most of these guys aren't communists. Certainly most of the younger ones are not communists. Just they and the older folks have fond memories of what communist Yemen was like. So before you start thinking that the UAE, first of all, if the UAE is backing it, it's not communist. I can promise you that. The UAE would not be found near any communists unless they were dead. So that's right off the rip. You know that the actual SLC is not, STC is not communist. They're backed by the UAE. And they and the PLC, the Presidential Leadership Council, backed by the Saudi Arabia, which is recognized by the international community, for whatever that's worth, as being the legitimate government of Yemen, is basically the old government in exile, supported by Saudi Arabia. And they've been fighting alongside, sort of, the STC against ISIS and against Ansar Allah, basically in order to take control of Yemen and run it as a colony of Saudi Arabia and the United States, which is what Yemen was when the Ansar Allah movement began and the so-called Houthi insurgency kicked off and took over the government and the country, which was their motivation for doing so, was to liberate Yemen from the colonial oppression from, in particular, Saudi Arabia, but the West in general. Unfortunately, I personally am not entirely sure what the UAE is looking for in Yemen. Why specifically they want it, I have to imagine it has to do with natural resource and trade routes, same stuff that Saudi Arabia is interested in, but unfortunately I couldn't tell you specifically why they got involved. Anyway, so Ansar Allah leads their resistance. They take over the government really quickly. There's not a whole lot of resistance to Ansar Allah. And then Saudi Arabia is like, oh shit, these guys aren't going to let us bully them around. We have to do something about this. And so they create this coalition to intervene in the Yemeni civil war. And they basically just escalate and make it a million times worse. They invade, get their asses kicked. The UAE invades on their behalf, gets obliterated so badly that the UAE has literally never again sent ground troops into another country. That's how badly the Yemenis mauled the Emiratis. Of course, need I remind you that the Emirates is a slave state anyway. And Saudis fared only slightly better in the sense that they also got mauled badly, but didn't give up. And so they just keep grinding up their troops for sport, I guess. The king of Saudi Arabia seems to enjoy watching young Saudi men get killed by Yemenis. Why? I don't know. But the Yemenis take no pleasure in it either. So I don't know who's benefiting from that. But that's what he does, is he just grinds up kids, Saudi kids, and feeds them to the Yemenis for some reason. Anyway, so the UAE and Saudi Arabia have been tacit allies here, both with their own colonial interests. And now it's come to a head. So the STC decided a few days ago that they were going to announce secession. The territory that they controlled, which was about, by my estimates, maybe 30% of the landmass, 30 to 40% of the landmass of Yemen, which again represented like at most 10% of the population. They're like, all right, we're going to secede. South Yemen's going to secede formally from Yemen and be its own country. And I guess that was a bridge too far for Saudi Arabia. And them and the, again, internationally recognized Presidential Leadership Council said, you guys are done. Get out. And they did, quite literally, with after this article was published. They lost so much ground that the STC effectively no longer exists. I believe they were only in Aden. Let me double check. As of 2 days ago. Oh, I'm sorry. As of 8 o'clock this morning, they're only in Aden, and 40 some minutes ago, again from the time of this recording, Saudi-backed troops were moving into Aden. So it's, by the time you're watching this, the STC is going to be gone. And so what's Ansar Allah doing? They're waiting it out. Ansar Allah's end goal has always been the unity of Yemen, and a unified Yemen opposed to outside influence and colonial domination and control. So they are waiting to see what happens. But again, Ansar Allah governs almost the entire country, population-wise. Almost everything else has been varying forms of barren desert. And when it comes to, well, is Saudi Arabia better than the UAE? Well, of course not. Saudi Arabia might not be an evil slave state exactly, at least not as bad as the UAE, but of course they still have their neo-colonial interests in Yemen and are brutalizing the people. And of course the biggest tragedy of this all is that every time one of these soldiers who is fighting either for Emirati interests or for Saudi interests dies, he's Yemeni. And that is, of course, the biggest tragedy of the civil war and of the development of the last couple of days. Saudi Arabia launches airstrikes, UAE launches airstrikes, their soldiers clash, but it's all exclusively Yemenis dying. And Ansar Allah has put out multiple statements where they're not supporting either side, and even when they see their enemies or their opponents get defeated, they're not happy about it because their opponents are their brothers and sisters and their neighbors. They are other Yemenis who should not be dying and should not be fighting on behalf of Saudi Arabia or on behalf of United Arab Emirates, both of which, of course, are doing so largely on behalf of the United States, and are funded by the United States and armed by the United States and defended by the United States and supported by the United States. So Ansar Allah, certainly, it might be nice to have one of the other guys off the board, but it certainly brings them no pleasure to see their own brothers and sisters getting killed by the Saudis or the Emiratis, or let alone fighting for them. So that is my very brief analysis and overview of the last couple days in Yemen. We'll have to see how it all develops. Right now, the country is split into both North and South Yemen again by default, but we'll have to see what happens. The UAE really suck. I mean, when they occupied the island of Socotra a couple years ago, and when they left their occupation, they literally tore up all the roads that they built just out of spite. So that's a kind of petty little assholes that we're dealing with in Yemen. So with any luck, we'll see the civil war itself wrap up soon. We'll see the PLC and Ansar Allah reach a diplomatic solution to their differences, and that they will overall reject Western, but especially U.S., Emirati, and Saudi interference in their country. Did you know the People's Report is produced for video and audio platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Greenland belongs to its people. European leaders unite over Trump's threats to annex territory. January 6, 2026, via CNBC. European leaders on Tuesday issued a joint statement to push back against U.S. President Donald Trump's renewed interest in Greenland, saying security in the Arctic must be achieved collectively. The Kingdom of Denmark, including Greenland, is part of NATO, the statement said, according to a letter published by Denmark's Prime Minister's office on Twitter. Security in the Arctic must therefore be achieved collectively, in conjunction with NATO allies, including the United States, by upholding the principles of the UN Charter, including sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the inviolability of the borders. These are universal principles, and we will not stop defending them, they continued. Greenland belongs to its people. It is for Denmark and Greenland, and them only, to decide on matters concerning Denmark and Greenland. The letter was signed by Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as well as the leaders of Italy, Spain, and Poland. The coordinated message, which also described the U.S. as an essential partner in the push for Arctic security, comes as Trump once again sets his sights on the vast, mineral-rich, and sparsely populated territory. The U.S. president, who has long advocated for control over the self-governing Danish territory, told NBC News on Monday that he was very serious with his intent to acquire Greenland. Trump also said he had no timeline for doing so, however. Alarm bells have been ringing in Denmark, which is responsible for the defense of Greenland, given that Trump's remarks follow Washington's major military operation in Venezuela. Greenland Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen welcomed the joint statement from European leaders and urged the U.S. to seek a respectful dialogue through the appropriate diplomatic channels. Our country is not something that can be annexed or taken over because you feel like it, Nielsen said on Tuesday in a Facebook post, according to a Google translation. Denmark's Frederiksen had previously warned that an American takeover of Greenland would amount to the end of the NATO military alliance. I believe that the U.S. president should be taken seriously when he says that he wants Greenland, Frederiksen told Danish broadcaster TV2 on Monday, according to a CNBC translation. But I also want to make it clear that if the United States chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops. That is, including our NATO and thus the security that has been provided since the end of the Second World War, she added. Speaking to CNBC's Silvia Amaro before European leaders published their joint statement, European Defense Commissioner Andreas Kubilius said that the European Union stands together with Denmark over ongoing Greenland tensions. I agree with Danish Prime Minister Frederiksen when she said that if things will develop to such a case that the Americans will take some actions against Greenland, it will be the end of the transatlantic partnership, Kubilius said on Tuesday. So that is very serious, and I hope that Americans will take also their actions in a very serious way. And from our point of view, our position is very clear, he added. Might be a little controversial. If the United States annexation of Greenland means the dissolution of NATO, as Denmark and other European leaders are saying, I think we should let them take it. Only halfway a joke. I mean, the total dissolution of NATO would be a net benefit for the world and a wonderful thing to happen. I'd love to see it in my lifetime and ideally soon. Good chance it'll happen under Trump too. So, if this is what it takes, am I going to be that upset about it? Not really. Plus, I always get a pleasure out of seeing monarchies lose territory and status and whatnot. Of course, losing it to the United States isn't exactly a step up, but, Denmark is still the king, so... But, I mean, that's about all I'll say positive about these developments. It would be very, very nice to see the Nazi American terror organization, collapse under its own Nazism and Americanism and terrorism, and lose it as an organization. There you go, got the whole acronym gone. That'd be very nice. But it's really interesting, and not surprising, but interesting and worth pointing out that Europe, the European Union, NATO, etc., loves to play the land belongs to the people and territorial integrity and borders and all that when it comes to white people, when it comes to Danes, when it comes to, I guess, Greenlanders as well, when it comes to Palestinians, when it comes to Yemenis, when it comes to Sudanese, when it comes to Somalis, I guess, is the correct term. When it comes to anyone else, Iraqis, when it comes to Venezuela, when it comes to Panama, etc., etc. Canada, maybe, even if you're, in the United States looking forward. Well, then it doesn't matter anymore. You can steal land in Palestine and bulldoze homes and murder people and leave them dead in the streets. You can bomb Yemen. You can partition Somalia. You can invade Iraq and kill 1.5 million people there. You can annex and steal and conquer indigenous lands from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But as soon as you want to take a bit of Europe's land, as soon as you want to take Greenland, as soon as you want to take Crimea, as soon as you want to take, Ukraine or whatever, now territory has to be respected. Well, now people deserve self-governance on their land. When Ansar Allah says, yes, we're going to govern ourselves in Yemen, we bomb them for 10 years and send in nuclear aircraft carriers, nuclear vessels to patrol them and police them and terrorize them. When Burkina Faso says, yeah, we're going to be independent and we're going to kick out France, then we're going to sponsor coups and attack them. When Venezuela says, we don't want you Yankees on our territory, we're going to bomb them and kidnap the president. When Cuba says, yeah, we want to be independent, we want to govern ourselves, we starved them for 60, 70 years. When the Koreans say, we want to govern ourselves, we invade their peninsula, occupy half of it, and then obliterate and murder 20% of the population and then have it under siege for the next 70, 80 years. But when Denmark says, well, we want to maintain all of our territory, when we want to own Greenland still, that's perfectly acceptable, and that's in fact seen as the morally correct thing to do. And don't take my dismissal of Denmark's ownership of Greenland, stewardship maybe, of Greenland as being legitimately supportive of American claims to Greenland. Obviously, the United States doesn't deserve to exist, let alone have claims over Greenland. It doesn't deserve to have claims over New York or Pennsylvania or California or New Mexico or Texas, let alone Greenland. Certainly doesn't deserve to have claims over Puerto Rico or Guam or the Virgin Islands, etc., let alone Greenland. So don't take my dismissal of that as being tacitly or implicitly in support of the Trump administration in any capacity. Just pointing out the blatant hypocrisy of the Western world, that when a territory serves U.S. interests, then it can't be violated. But if it doesn't serve U.S. interests, it exists only to be violated. Vietnam was violated by the United States. Cambodia was violated by the United States. Laos was violated by the United States within living memory. And, we still, Bat and I, we still have to apologize for the soldiers. Oh, well, they were draftees, or, oh, they didn't know any better, or still support the troops. When our soldiers brutalize Venezuela, when we brutalize Iraq or Afghanistan, which somehow I didn't mention until now, or, Yemen or Syria, we gotta, we hand wave it. Even if we're, progressives and liberals in the United States, we'll hand wave it. But, Greenland, that's a bridge too far. If you like the People's Report, check out our other shows at solidaritytv.org. Green Card Update. New visa travel restrictions come into force. December 26, 2025 via Newsweek. New visa travel restrictions and immigration enforcement protocols, including advanced identification measures and stricter residency checks for green card holders, are issued by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and are now in effect as of December 26, 2025. These measures, introduced under President Donald Trump's administration, aim to strengthen national security and modernize border management using advanced technologies. The new rules authorize federal authorities to monitor the international travel of non-U.S. citizens, including lawful permanent residents, and apply especially heightened scrutiny to green card applicants and holders from 19 countries, which have been flagged for security risks. Two primary rule changes are now in effect: biometric entry-exit system, and all non-U.S. citizens, including green card holders, will now have their photographs taken by U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials at every entry and exit point across airports, land crossings, and seaports. This includes children under 14 and adults over 79, groups which were previously exempt. In addition to photos, the CBP may also decide to collect fingerprints and iris scans and match them against existing travel documents as part of the Traveler Verification Service. Green card reviews are now on for certain countries. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services will now conduct intensive reviews of green cards issued to citizens from 19 countries: Afghanistan, Burma and Myanmar, Chad, Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Turkmenistan, and Venezuela, due to concerns about previous vetting and approval standards. For green card holders specifically, these new rules mean that mandatory biometric checks, being photographed and possibly fingerprinted, at every U.S. border crossing when entering and leaving the country. Heightened scrutiny, greater questions at borders, especially for those from the 19 flagged countries. Documentation readiness, ensuring all paperwork is up to date to respond quickly to official requests. Processing uncertainty, potential delays for pending or future green card or visa applications. U.S. Customs and Border Protection explained in its Federal Register filing, implementing an integrated biometric entry-exit system that compares biometric data of aliens collected upon arrival with biometric data collected upon departure helps address the national security concerns arising from the threat of terrorism, the fraudulent use of legitimate travel documentation, aliens who remain in the United States beyond their period of authorized stay or overstays, or are present in the United States without being admitted or paroled, as well as incorrect or incomplete biographic data for travelers. The rollout of the biometric entry-exit system will continue over the next 3 to 5 years, starting with major airports and expanding to land and seaports. DHS and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services are expected to issue additional guidance on specific protocols for green card reviews and any extra documentation requirements for individuals from the listed countries. Green card holders, especially those from the 19 flag nations, are advised to keep records up to date, monitor communications from DHS and USCIS, and consult immigration attorneys if traveling or awaiting status decisions. Continued absurd developments in U.S. immigration policy. And I know we covered this a few weeks ago, that it was coming up, but this is still so ridiculous to me. I wouldn't submit my biometrics to a foreign country when I enter and leave. It's ridiculous. I wouldn't do it for Germany, for England, for Poland, for China, for India, for anybody else. I don't know why we would expect anyone to do it for us. It's a violation of privacy, and we already know that they're just storing all this information to create a big database. It's absurd. They don't need, if my passport isn't good enough, why would I come here? And it's such a ridiculous thing to start rolling out right in time for the World Cup. It's, at the very least, why not wait until next year? Why not wait until after the World Cup when we're already expecting, or should be expecting, probably 1 million tourists all at once, if not more. I don't know honestly how many people go to the World Cup. Tons. I know that. How are we gonna have the space to process all this? The lines at the airport are gonna be like 1 million miles long. It's just absurd, and I would hate to have to go through that. It would suck if every time. What about Canadians? Or is it every single time a Canadian crosses the border, are they gonna have to do this? That would be so annoying, especially if you're like a truck driver or something. But even if you're just coming down from Windsor to tour Detroit, that's gonna suck. It's gonna be really annoying. And it's not going to make anybody safer. I really don't think getting the fingerprints and the iris scans and all that of every single Canadian who enters the country is going to make me any safer. It's not going to make me any safer to do that to Afghanis, to Yemenis, to Libyans, to, what are some of the other ones? I think Sri Lanka was one of them. Like, who is this? How is this keeping us more safe? And of course, we all know that the anti-terrorism argument is all bullshit anyway. Terrorism isn't real, not in the way that they want us to believe it is. And it's all about, creating fear in database. Because eventually, once we all get comfortable and not complain about them doing this to all of the immigrants, we're going to be next. Every time we want to leave the country, they're going to hit us with the biometric scans. And frankly, I don't want the United States government to have my, fingerprints or my hair follicles or my iris scans anyway. I mean, they don't need it. But they're going to take it every time I cross the border in either direction. But there's another thing, like, why do we have to scan that when people are leaving? Who cares? I don't know. It's absurd. And I guess I can understand this. We want to create a database. We want to have consistent data. When someone enters and leaves, we want to make sure it's the same person. I guess. But again, like, just doing it when they enter is so excessive as is. It's government overreach. If you're a big government overreach type of person, this is clearly government overreach. And it's anti-immigrant. And of course, one of the big drivers of immigration, some of the big drivers of immigration, because I'm probably not going to get them all, U.S. imperialism, climate change, destabilization, our extractive efforts. You go into the Congo, one of the countries. Is it the Republic of the Congo or the Democratic Republic of the Congo? Let me double check that real quick. The Republic of the Congo. Okay. I'm surprised that the Democratic Republic of the Congo wasn't one of them, but, no complaints. you go into the Congo, start extracting all the cobalt and make these children work as slave miners for your corporation that's based in Canada, because they always are. And then they're like, well, this sucks, I'm going to leave. And then we say, well, I don't know, we're pretty spooked about you coming here. Then don't mess up their country. If we were all that concerned about Libyans, maybe we shouldn't have blown up their country. If we were all that concerned about Afghanis, maybe we shouldn't have blown up their country. And if we're all that concerned about Afghanis because we blew up their country, maybe A, shouldn't have done it, B, maybe we deserve it. If the National Guardsmen who got themselves got in D.C. the other day, I don't know. Maybe they had it coming, being U.S. Imperial stormtroopers who destroyed Afghanistan, fucked up the people for 40 years. I don't know. Maybe Afghani gunmen have a point. Think it might be worth considering. Maybe Congolese refugees, they're coming here, and they might be terrorists. I don't know. Maybe we've earned it. Just some food for thought. Not that I'm excited about the prospect of mass violence in the United States, but I mean, the police do it all the time anyway. So, what, now I'm supposed to complain because the guy who's shooting down random people in the streets is not a U.S. citizen? Like, what difference does it make? And when the bullets start flying and people start dying, am I really going to care about the citizenship status of the shooter? Because chances are, he's American. This week's book recommendation is This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed by Charles E. Cobb Jr. This book describes how firearm ownership, education, and training made the civil rights movement successful. Latin America Donroe Doctrine. Trump attack on Venezuela is part of imperial plan to impose U.S. hegemony in Latin America. January 5, 2026, via Geopolitical Economy. Donald Trump ordered the U.S. military on January 3rd to bomb Venezuela, kidnap its constitutional president Nicolas Maduro, and send him to New York to be subjected to a show trial on politically motivated charges. This brazen assault on Venezuela is part of a larger U.S. imperialist offensive in Latin America as a whole. The Trump administration has openly invoked the 202-year-old colonial Monroe Doctrine, has updated it for the 21st century, proudly dubbing it the Donroe Doctrine. The U.S. empire's broader plan was spelled out clearly in the Trump administration's 2025 National Security Strategy. The document showed how the U.S. seeks to forcibly impose its hegemony in the entire Western Hemisphere. It openly invoked the Monroe Doctrine. U.S. officials have enthusiastically embraced the colonial doctrine, which dates back to 1823. Mere hours after the U.S. government attacked Venezuela, an official Trump account on Twitter posted propaganda depicting the U.S. president standing over all of the Americas, from Alaska at the top of North America to Argentina at the bottom of South America, holding a big stick reading Donroe Doctrine. The image was a reference to a Monroe Doctrine political cartoon from 1905. U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth reposted it on his official government account. The Trump administration's national security strategy emphasized that the goal is for U.S. corporations to control all of the Western Hemisphere's strategic natural resources, including critical minerals and rare earth elements. It is by no means a coincidence that Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves. Although today the U.S. is the top oil producer on Earth and a net exporter of oil, it is still heavily reliant on importing heavy crude. Much of that comes from Canada, but Venezuela's heavy crude is a potential alternative source. In a press conference held after he bombed Venezuela, Trump claimed that the U.S. government will run the country. He added, "We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money. We're in the oil business," the U.S. president stressed. "We're going to be taking out a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground." In addition to enormous reserves of oil and natural gas, Venezuela also has significant deposits of gold, critical minerals, and rare earth elements. The U.S. government has made it clear that it wants to create a new supply chain in the Western Hemisphere that cuts out China, to prepare for future conflict with Beijing. It hopes it can use Latin America's critical minerals and rare earths to do so. This is also a major reason why Trump wants to colonize and pillage Greenland, which has 25 of the 30 materials considered critical by the European Union. The Trump administration's attack on Venezuela is part of a larger imperialist assault on Latin America, and the global South more generally. The overt savagery and cruelty of the U.S. empire likewise demonstrates how puerile and ridiculous the democracy rhetoric of Western officials and pundits is, when they accuse besieged global South countries like Venezuela of supposedly being authoritarian. It is impossible for the nations of Latin America and the global South as a whole to practice democracy when the world's most powerful and deadliest empire is constantly interfering in their elections, attacking them, imposing sanctions on them, and sponsoring coups. True democracy is impossible while imperialism exists. Unfortunately, calling it the Donroe Doctrine is kind of funny. I do unfortunately get some amusement out of that. Now that that's said, well, we can actually discuss the article. The Trump administration, but really the U.S. at large, their adherence to the Monroe Doctrine is nothing short of, outdated. And it was absurd in the first place, the idea that some countries should be able to govern an entire hemisphere, that it's all up to them to have and to own, is beyond the pale. It was absurd when Monroe initiated it in the first place. It was absurd when everyone since kept it up. I mean, when the United States intervened in half a dozen Latin American countries on behalf of, the United Fruit Company back in the 1900s. The Spanish-American War, which won us Puerto Rico and Cuba. The, Cuban crisis, if you'll call it that. Our blockade of Cuba, our military interventions in Nicaragua and in Panama and in Grenada, just to name a few from the last 30 years. And then, our belief, our intervention, if you'll call it that, our terroristic overthrowing of the democratically elected government of Chile, the murder of Salvador Allende on September 11th, and the installation of fascist dictatorship, which is just now being renewed again down in Chile. All of this stuff, and again, this is all examples just from the last 50 years. Yeah, I guess 50, 1970, yeah, but 55 years, 56 years. And, all of these examples of the Monroe Doctrine in play. So, Donald Trump's not the first, second, third to do it. It's been U.S. policy forever. It's no accident that, we're giving the Peace Prize to Venezuelan compradors and traders in order to destabilize or hope to destabilize Venezuela in order to allow the United States to invade and take resources from it. Completing the Golden Circle, I think they called it. And just the complete cornering of markets in order to, get new resources or tap into new to us resource sources. I could have said that one better. But it's not just about the oil. The oil is what everyone talks about because it's such a big thing that we consume and it's so prominent. And Donald Trump's like, yeah, we got to get the oil. Probably could have done a better Trump voice too. Whatever. But it's about these rare earth metals as well that we are going to be using in chip development and whatnot. It's about a cheap labor force that we can exploit to continue to create marketable goods at costs below what we'd be willing to pay or what we'd have to pay to create them here in the United States. Using Venezuelan or other Latin American citizens as a labor pool that we are going to underpay, in other words, abuse and exploit in order to maintain high records of profits. We saw this in Haiti in the 90s, where we destroyed specifically Bill Clinton destroyed their farming and agricultural sector in order to reshape the country into a more factory-based and textile-based economy, which only resulted in them having to rely rather on their own home-produced rice, but rice grown and sold from Arkansas. No wonder why Bill Clinton, of all people, did it. So, this kind of exploitation in Latin America and in the Western Hemisphere is par for the course for the U.S. empire. It's certainly nothing new and certainly shouldn't shock anybody. Perhaps the brazenness of it these days, back in the day when you could just send a bunch of warships to, Nicaragua, to Venezuela, etc., to these so-called banana republics in order to protect Chiquita Banana and their business interests, might not have shocked people then, but it certainly would have if we did it today. So only the brazenness is new, and even that's not new. It's just old-fashioned at this point. So, everything old is new again these days. It's retro, if you will, is what Trump's going for. So, that's just a continuation of what we've always done. And, of course, it's another way to kick China out of the markets in order to, maintain hegemony and to prevent China from upsetting that hegemony. But really, the United States really doesn't like it when anyone tells us no. When Venezuela, when Cuba says, no, sorry, we're going to play by our rules, we're not going to be your toys, then we're going to have to get involved. Then we're going to have to send Delta Force to come and fuck you guys up. We're going to have to get our most drug-addled cartel babies to come and molest your children. That's what Delta Force does best. It is a criminal cartel. Quite literally, they sold guns to the cartels in Mexico and drugs and whatever. It's a different story. Ask Seth Harper about it. But I digress. So, that's what the Donroe Doctrine is. It's not new. It's funny. It's almost comical in its brazenness, which has kind of been Trump's whole brand, especially in this past election or in this past administration. But, it's par for the course for the United States. Nobody would have done anything different. And honestly, with the rhetoric from the Democrats about Venezuela, we know that Harris would have done maybe not as brash and not as bombastic of an action, but she certainly was not disappointed to hear about it when it happened. I can guarantee you that. Remember the words of Chairman Mao, civilize the mind and make savage the body. If it makes sense for you this week, take time every day to do a few sit-ups. U.S. lithium mine permit violates Indigenous people's rights. February 6, 2025, via Human Rights Watch. The United States government's decision to permit Lithium America to mine at Thacker Pass in Nevada violated Indigenous people's rights, Human Rights Watch and the ACLU said in a report released today. The 18,000-acre mining project is under construction and will extract lithium from one of the world's largest known deposits. The 133-page report, The Land of Our People Forever, United States Human Rights Violations Against the Numu Nuwu and the Newe and the Rush for Lithium, found that the U.S. Bureau of Land Management permitted the Thacker Pass mine without obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of the Indigenous people, the Numu Nuwu and Newe, or Northern Paiute and Western Shoshone in English, in violation of their rights to religion, culture, and to their ancestral lands under international human rights law and standards. While there may be others, at least 6 tribes have connection to the land at Thacker Pass. The Thacker Pass project shows how U.S. mining laws and the permit process run roughshod over the rights of Indigenous peoples, said Abby Koenig of Rutherford, Aria Nair Fellow with the American Civil Liberties Union and Human Rights Watch. U.S. federal and state mining agencies should urgently review the regulations governing mine permits to bring them in line with international standards on Indigenous peoples' right to free, prior, and informed consent. Between September 2023 and January 2025, Human Rights Watch and the ACLU interviewed 41 Indigenous community members, journalists, lawyers, and experts about the impact of the mine. Researchers also reviewed litigation, scientific studies, news and social media, satellite imagery, and environmental maps. The Bureau of Land Management, BLM, an agency within the Department of the Interior, when approving the mine on January 15, 2021, stated it had been in contact with tribal governments regarding this project from its early stages and throughout the ensuring process. The extent of its direct contact with the tribes, however, was 3 rounds of mailings sent to 3 tribal governments. They kept saying consultation, consultation. I guess they think that's what they were doing, said a Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone religious and traditional practices leader who requested anonymity. but they didn't actually do that. Lithium Americas moved forward despite opposition from at least 5 tribal governments, Human Rights Watch and the ACLU found. U.S. courts rebuffed tribes' efforts to challenge the adequacy of the consultation process after the agency had issued the permit. One, the Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone tribe, had since signed an agreement with Lithium Americas and issued a letter supporting the mine. While the mine is not displacing any of the communities, the construction work has prevented Numu Nuwu and Anewe indigenous peoples from accessing parts of Pihi Muhua, the indigenous name for the land in the area. Access to the land is important for religious and cultural practices. Tribal residents also expressed fears that the mine threatens their rights to health, a healthy environment, and water. I looked this up because you probably noticed this article was dated from almost a year ago, February of 25. And I looked it up, and not only has there been no progress made on the indigenous front, and as the mining operations and the mining construction are still ongoing, but in October, the United States purchased a 5% stake in the mine. So that's fun. The U.S. government, and I guess the intention is that the United States people will reap, 5% of the profits of this lithium mine. Of course, can we really be that surprised that the population of the United States is going to be directly materially benefiting from the theft and abuses of the indigenous population? Wow. As I believe I already said, that's how the United States exists. It exists by and for a predominantly white Western population at the expense of the oppressed nations, of which the Native Americans and the indigenous populations of North America are counted amongst. The U.S. stealing from, breaking treaties from, selling out, or just otherwise cheating indigenous peoples for resources is certainly nothing new. Again, it's literally how the country was founded. It was founded by people who wanted to steal more from the Native Americans than the British were going to allow them. It's not to give the British Empire or the British Crown any sort of credit, but you have to be a certain type of person for the British Empire to say, wow, man, you're too racist. We're going to have to rein you in. And I believe it was Red Cloud who said that the United States has made many promises to the Native Americans and broken all but one of them. They promised to take the land, and they did. That is the basis of the United States, the basis of the ground. If you're an American, the ground that you live on is that it was stolen by the force of arms through genocide, through trickery, through massacres, through guns, germs, and steel. Isn't the most historically accurate book, but that this is a land that was stolen from people who still exist despite our best efforts to destroy them. So, if you're wondering, does Israel have a right to exist? Obviously no, but does the United States? Obviously no. It's formed and still exists the exact same way. I learned as recently as this week that the U.S. Homestead Act that allowed people to just go out and just take Native American lands ended in the 1970s. There are people around old enough to be your parents who could have just taken land from the Native Americans and had built the house there. It's insane. And, that's not to say that with the ending of the Homestead Act that the Native Americans are no longer oppressed. There's a reason why self-harm behaviors, whether it be suicide or drug and alcohol abuse, are so high on reservations. You throw people through a genocide and through quite literally an apocalypse and then put them into ghettos for eternity after destroying or appropriating their culture, their language, their legacy, their history. Yeah, it's not going to turn out well for them, which of course is the whole point. It's why the United States doesn't actually fund or support any of these reservations, ghettos really, open air prisons, because they want to profit off the exploitation and abuse of the Native Americans, and they don't really give a shit. The United States is a deeply evil, racist, white supremacist country that exists by and for white supremacists And, they're not going to treat the Native Americans any differently than they'll treat the Native Yemenis or the Native Palestinians or the Native Venezuelans, etc. There are people who exist in the United States view to abuse. And so, yeah, they'll play nice because, it's easier to sometimes because they don't want to deal with the complaints from the Americans or from other people, or it's just inconvenient. But, when they want to build a pipeline through native lands, they're going to do it. They want to build a lithium mine on native lands, they're going to do it. If they want to kick all the native people out to Oklahoma so they can steal their territory for white slavers to build plantations on, they're going to do it. And there's nothing stopping them. There's no force stopping them. And force is the only thing that could stop them because neither the Democrats nor the Republicans or any other active political party in the United States has any interest in actually addressing the questions of land back, the questions of freeing the land and returning it to the people from to whom the land originally belonged, or whom originally belonged to the land. This is a better way of putting it. So, it's the lithium mine, which again, you, if you're American anyway, now kind of own stake in, exists as just an example of colonialism in which the white colonist is raping the indigenous land and selling it for a profit, using it as a commodity and screwing over the indigenous population while they're at it. It's no different from what the Israelis are doing to Palestine. It's no different from what half of Europe did to Africa, Asia, Central and South America. No different from the ivory farms, ivory harvesting, and the rubber farms in the Congo. It's the exact same thing, just replay it again and again and again and again. It'd mean a lot if you joined our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. ICE plans a $100 million wartime recruitment push targeting gun shows, military fans for hires. December 31st, 2025, via The Washington Post. A strategy document shared among immigration officials details plans to use influencers and geo-targeted ads to supercharge their push to hire thousands of deportation officers nationwide. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials are planning to spend over $100 million over a one-year period to recruit gun rights supporters and military enthusiasts through online influencers and a geo-targeted advertising campaign, part of what the agency called a wartime recruitment strategy. It said was critical to hiring thousands of new deportation officers nationwide, according to an internal document reviewed by The Washington Post. The spending would help President Donald Trump's mass deportation agenda dominate media networks and recruitment channels, including through ads targeting people who have attended UFC fights, listened to patriotic podcasts, or shown an interest in guns and tactical gear, according to a 30-page document distributed among officials this summer detailing ICE's surge hiring market strategy. The Department of Homeland Security has spoken publicly about its fast-track effort to significantly increase ICE's workforce by hiring more than 10,000 new employees, a surge promoted on social media with calls for recruits willing to perform their sacred duty and defend the homeland by repelling foreign invaders. The agency currently employs more than 20,000 people, according to ICE's website. But the document, reported here for the first time, reveals new details about the vast scale of the recruitment effort and its unconventional strategy to flood the market, with millions of dollars in spending for Snapchat ads, influencers and live streamers on Rumble, a video platform popular with conservatives. Under the strategy, ICE would also use an ad industry technique known as geofencing to send ads to the phone, web browsers, and social media feeds of anyone who set foot near military bases, NASCAR races, college campuses, or gun and trade shows. Congress this summer tripled ICE's enforcement and deportation budget to about $30 billion by passing the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, helping to start a hiring spree that officials have said would be necessary to carry out the Trump administration's promise of the biggest mass deportation in American history. Officials set a goal of 1 million deportations within the first year of Trump's term. Recruitment ads have proliferated across TV, radio, print, and podcasts, directing viewers to an ICE hiring website that portrays immigration as an existential threat. America has been invaded by criminals and predators, reads the website, which includes an image of Uncle Sam. We need you to get them out. On social media, administration accounts have mixed immigration raid footage with memes from action movies and video games to portray ICE's mission as a fight against the enemies at the gates. Want to deport illegals with your absolute boys? One post says. Are you going to cowboy up or just lay there and bleed? Says another. But to reach ICE's rapid hiring goal of about 14,000 new enforcement and removal operations officers, Homeland Security investigations agents, ICE lawyers, and support staff, the strategy document also calls for deploying more finely targeted digital advertising tools that can home in on viewers' interests and lifestyles. Americus Reed, a marketing professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, said the ICE strategy reminded him of the Army of One campaign that the military once used to build up recruits as mighty warfighters, critical to safeguarding the American way of life. They're aiming for that sweet spot of people who've got something to prove, who want to have that power under the guise of patriotism, he said. At the time of this recording, it's January 7th. So if you ever needed to see what was going to happen from these recruitments, trying to get the most debased men in America to sign on to your Gestapo hit squad, to go out and fight war and to see immigration enforcement as a combat deployment, to go and protect the homeland and destroy the flood and all these other sloganeerings for their wartime actions, well, you're seeing it. We saw ICE today, at the time of this recording today, only a few hours ago, shoot a woman in the face at point-blank range for, I suppose, not complying with orders fast enough. Remains to be seen if they're going to get away with it. Probably they will. It's going to take a lot of... how much public pressure did it take to convict or to even try Derek Chauvin? It's it's a different game at this point. So, he's probably going to get away with it. That's my guess for now. It's not me being pessimistic, just me seeing the lay of the land. But these are the results that you get when you ask for, again, the barbarous portions of the population to sign on to be armed and barbarous. And honestly, it's kind of the recruitment targeting is almost kind of insulting in a way. Like, oh well, if you like NASCAR, you're gonna be perfect for the Gestapo. If you live near an army base, you're gonna be perfect for the Gestapo. If you like guns, you're gonna be perfect for the Gestapo. I don't know, it's kind of insulting. What if you just really like NASCAR? What if you like the pit crew? What if you live near the racetrack and so it's something you can do regularly? What if you just like guns? What if, for whatever reason, you're infatuated with camouflage? Like, I don't know. All of these things are just being UFC. And UFC does kind of have that reputation for a reason. But, maybe you just legitimately like combat sports. I don't know. It's a little insulting. But, this is the kind of people that they're looking for. They're looking for, ridiculously aggressive people who are going to see ICE enforcement and immigration enforcement and forced deportations as something, not just something noble, but something militant. And that's really what they're looking for. They're looking for people to sign on to this private army to be armed, angry, militant racists. That's what they're looking for. It's the U.S. State Department's official Ku Klux Klan branch, if you will. And that's what they want. And they're marketing it to, young, ideally, I suppose, disaffected men. I personally saw ads that were like, "Stop the flood" with Master Chief on it, which, as an avid Halo fan and player, is really frustrating. That's, there's a different topic of conversation, I suppose. But remember, the Covenant in Halo are Christians. They are a Christian army looking to destroy and conquer the world, and you, the player, have to stop the fanatical Christians from taking over the galaxy. That's the plot of the game. So, if you played Halo, and then you're like, wow, I actually want to join on with the white supremacist Christian nationalist army and get rid of the minorities, you missed the point of the game. Covenant is also multi-ethnic, which is a different conversation, I guess. But, so I don't know. Maybe I just blew up my own argument there. Whatever. But you save the world by joining up with the minorities that you're fighting in Halo. I guess they're not minorities because they're whatever. But the Covenant, after you de-radicalize the Covenant, you then have to work with the Arbiter, who's the chief priest of the Catholic Church in the game, chief enforcer of the Catholic Church in the game, and him and all of the de-radicalized Christians who are multi-ethnic team up with you, and you can't win without teaming up with the other alien species. I don't know, whatever. I feel like that kind of speaks for itself too. You can't win as just being the white guy. You have to get it. You have to work with everybody else, or else you lose. I don't know. That ad in particular really aggravated me. Someone did not play the game or pay attention to the game. I don't know. Probably most people didn't, but that's a different conversation altogether. That's the kind of person that they want. They want someone who's going to go out there and shoot random women in the face for not doing what they're told. That's what they're encouraged to do. That is what the U.S. State Department wants people to do. And guess what? They've been doing this the whole time. Have they been shooting random people? Not necessarily, but they've been these aggressive Gestapo thugs for 2 decades now. They were under Obama. They were under Biden. And Harris promised to have this exact result of the most lethal army in the world and the mass deportations. This is the exact result she was campaigning on. So, the Democrats are not going to save you. The only thing that is these guys have to be put in their place. With any luck, we'll be able to do so through the legal system, and we won't have to resort to it. But right now, what we've been seeing is people gearing up for protests, and we have to go out into the streets non-violently. We have to make sure we don't riot, blah, 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 blah. It's very, very nice. I wish it worked like that. But at a certain point, we have to realize that First Amendment solutions have not been working. And at that point, we have to ask ourselves, at what point do we have to break out the Second Amendment solutions? Another way you can support us is by following us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Kushner, Witkoff draft $112 billion proposal to develop Gaza into a smart city with luxury resorts. December 2nd, 2025, via the New York Post. Trump administration reps have just revealed a grandiose $112 billion plan to rebuild war-torn Gaza into a futuristic international project dubbed Project Sunrise. The 10-year development plan, drafted by first son-in-law Jared Kushner, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and 2 top White House aides, is currently courting investor countries with a 32-slide PowerPoint presentation detailing the bold plan to renovate burning rubble into beach resorts. Gaza would see the development of luxury hotels, high-speed rail, and AI-optimized smart grid features that would revolutionize a small slice of the coveted Mediterranean coastline into a bustling metropolis, the Wall Street Journal reported. Gaza's destruction has been profound, but we believe that what lies ahead is not just restoration. It's a chance to develop a gateway of prosperity in the Middle East with state-of-the-art infrastructure, urban design, and technology. The executive summary slide read, according to the outlet. The total $112 billion cost would be spread out over 10 years, with the U.S. agreeing to anchor up to $60 billion in grants and guarantees on debts by raising industry funds. Reimagining Gaza as a smart city with tech-driven governance and services, one slide from the PowerPoint presentation beamed. The ambitious proposal, developed within the last 45 days by Kushner, Witkoff, and White House aides, consulted Israeli security experts about the path forward, further called for the establishing a chief digital office and an innovation lab to define standards and guide policymaking. The presentation does not go into detail about what countries or which companies would be invested in investing in the rebuilding fund, according to the Wall Street Journal. Though the plan mapped out distinct phases of construction, it did not provide details for housing the 2 million Palestinians who would be displaced during the massive construction necessary. There was an estimated 68 million tons of rubble in Gaza after thousands of Israeli airstrikes leveled cities during the 2-year war in Gaza. U.S. officials who have knowledge of the proposal are skeptical that it will come to fruition, because a condition would be Hamas agreeing to disarm, the journal reported. Witkoff, meanwhile, met Saturday in Miami with high-level delegations from Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar to discuss implementation for the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire plan. Tell me that that proposal was not the most AI-generated text you've ever heard. Let me read it again for you. Gaza's destruction has been profound, but we believe what lies ahead is not just restoration. It's a chance to develop a gateway of prosperity in the Middle East with state-of-the-art infrastructure, urban design, and technology. That's AI-generated text. That's textbook AI generation. So not only are they making making plans for an AI city, but AI is making those plans for them. These guys can't even be bothered to come up with their own plans. It's ridiculous. But on top of that, it's just so offensive. It's a chance to develop a gateway of prosperity in the Middle East. The gateway of prosperity has been the Middle East throughout most of history. This is, all the trade from the east to west went through the Middle East. People were very prosperous there. It's why the Ottoman Empire lasted for a bajillion years. It's why the Byzantine Empire was as powerful as it was, and why it was as profound as it was, and why all those crusades were launched in order to defend it, because it was a gateway of prosperity. And, the countries that aren't prosperous in the Middle East are not prosperous because of U.S. interference or other colonial interference. Turkey is relatively prosperous. Jordan is relatively prosperous. Egypt should be more prosperous than it is. El-Sisi sucks. Saudi Arabia is prosperous. The UAE is a slave state, so it's prosperous for Emiratis, but Oman is a prosperous country. Iraq was. Iran is. And so who isn't prosperous in the Middle East? Palestine, been undergoing 78, 79 years of occupation at this point. Brutal occupation at the hands of Western powers, exploitation, genocide. Syria, recently obliterated by the United States and other special interest groups, we'll say, within the country. Not that Bashar al-Assad was doing a great job, but, he was doing a better job than literally ISIS. Iraq, the United States destroyed through the 90s. Well, even before that, the United States destroyed Iraq, or helped destroy Iraq by goading them and then funding their stupid war against Iran, and then, of course, going to war with them in the 90s, and then bombing them all throughout the 90s, and then invading in 2003. Libya, the United States destroyed in 2011. Yemen, the United States has put protracted war on since 2011. I feel like I'm probably missing another significant one. Lebanon, which the United States has put protracted war on, and Israel has launched protracted war on for, again, generations, because of their continued support for the Palestinian cause, and, of course, their desire for independence and lack of colonial influence, or desire for a lack of colonial influence. So, these are countries that should be prosperous. And, many parts of Lebanon are. But the rest is just simply not allowed to be. So the fact that they'll be creating, a gateway of prosperity in the Middle East, the gateway of prosperity in the Middle East would exist in Gaza without the United States. Full stop. It already would be the gateway to prosperity without the United States involved. State-of-the-art infrastructure, urban design, and technology. All of that the Palestinians could have developed on their own had we let them. Urban design, I've seen some of these cities in the Middle East. They're beautiful. Sana'a is gorgeous. It's a stunning city, and it's very people first. It's very people focused instead of car focused. You know, their infrastructure is really designed for the needs of the people. And, you know, then they go on to reimagine Gaza as a smart city, whatever that means. Of course, we know what a smart city means. It means that it's a city run by corporations that, you know, spy on and surveil and extract from the people as much as they can, while giving them the comforts, I guess, the comforts of modernity in the process. And some of the other things here is ridiculous. Let's see. They specified luxury hotels, which Gaza already had to begin with. Gaza had them before the United States bombed the hell out of them in the last 2 years. Not very many. People couldn't really go touring or, be tourists in Gaza previously. It was very difficult. But they did have, their own version of luxury hotels, because the Palestinian people are very resilient, and they're going to do whatever they can to make the best out of the shittiest situations that we keep putting them in. AI optimized smart grid features, whatever that means. This one pisses me off though. High-speed rail. So apparently we can afford to rebuild Gaza into this a modern version of Neom that Saudi Arabia was trying and failed to do. And we can make this bullshit AI luxury spa playground for rich elites. And we can afford to give them high-speed rail. But we can't have that here? That's bullshit. Now, yeah, the Gaza Strip is like 25 miles long. So, you high-speed rail, I don't even know if a high-speed rail could really get up to high speeds at that, unless it was going from just one to the other and not making any stops. I don't know. I guess if you're going from, maybe if you're going to do a high-speed rail from Cairo to Gaza, that could make sense, maybe. But, I mean, that's a different thing altogether. Anyway, I really don't see that as being practical. Although, again, when you have 2.5 million people, or what used to be 2.5 million people, living pretty much all in a line along the coast, yeah, you should have a good rail system. And the fact that they don't, of course, is exclusively because of the U.S. empire and Israeli interference. I'm sure the Palestinians would have loved to have built their own rail network, and probably would have. But, we saw what happened when they tried to build an airport, and we just bombed it to hell. So, I don't know. That really pisses me off, that we'd be willing to pay for high-speed rail in Gaza for foreign tourists to use, and not for, because obviously, of course, much like some of these other, coastal programs, kind of like, at our most generous, we'll say, at our most generous, this would be a playground for the rich, staffed exclusively by the Palestinians. Now, would we actually allow the Palestinians to live and work there? Probably not. We've been doing our best to ethnically cleanse them for, 79 years. But, that's what their role would be. It would be cheap labor that we could exploit, so that way we could generate big profits from having rich people from Europe, Israel, and the United States go there as tourists and spend money that the Palestinian people are only going to be able to see as it passes from customer to owner's hands. Cheap labor, and exploitative violence, of financial violence, and following the very real military violence. That's the plan, and that's the best case scenario. Otherwise, it's just straight up ethnic cleansing, and then creating, their little coveted Mediterranean coastline, making it into a bustling metropolis. For who, and owned by and lived in and worked by who, is not made clear. Probably Israel wants that to all be Israelis. The United States probably doesn't care all that much, as long as their business interests get met. But, they never ask the Palestinians what they want. I'm sure the Palestinians would love to have, Gaza be a pretty little resort town with like $110 billion invested into rebuilding it with high-speed rail and all that. But they're not going to want it if it comes at the expense of their ethnic cleansing, and it comes to the benefit of U.S. corporate interests. And it's sickening that that is a plan that we would have. But last thing I'll say, if anyone's watching this and they're Palestinian, Palestine does deserve a really good, robust rail network. You guys all, and especially in Gaza, y'all live in a line. You live in a big, long line. It's 25 miles, not that long. Please, first chance you get, build yourself a good train, and don't worry so much about car infrastructure. Rail is the past. Rail is the future. And you guys would all enjoy that very, very much. Obviously, you have bigger problems at the moment, and we're doing our best to solve those. But once it becomes feasible, the train, it will change your life. You will love it. And that's all I have to say about that. If you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Israel used Palantir technology in its 2024 Lebanon pager attack, book claims. December 10, 2025, via the Middle East Eye. Palantir software was used by Israel in its 2024 pager attacks in Lebanon, according to a new book by Alex Karp, co-founder of the Palantir tech company. On 17th of September, thousands of pagers belonging to Hezbollah members, including civilians not involved in any armed activity, were detonated across Lebanon. Many showed error messages and vibrated loudly prior to exploding, luring Hezbollah members or, in some cases, their family members to stand close by at the point of detonation. The next day, more communication devices exploded, including at the public funerals of Hezbollah members and civilians who had been killed the previous day. While many Israeli figures celebrated, praised, and even joked about the attacks, United Nations experts called them a terrifying violation of international law. In total, 42 people were killed and thousands were wounded, many left with life-altering injuries to the eyes, face, and hands. Karp's new biography reveals that Israel deepened its use of the company's technology after it launched the war on Gaza in October 2023, deploying it in numerous operations. The company's technology was deployed by the Israelis during military operations in Lebanon in 2024 that decimated Hezbollah's top leadership, wrote Michael Steinberger, author of The Philosopher in the Valley, Alex Karp, Palantir, and the Rise of the Surveillance State. It was also used in Operation Grim Reaper, in which hundreds of Hezbollah fighters were injured and maimed when their pagers and walkie-talkies exploded. The Israelis had booby-trapped the devices. He said that the demand for Palantir's assistance by Israel was so great that the company dispatched a team of engineers from London to help get Israeli users online. The involvement of a range of tech companies in Israel's attacks on its neighbors in recent years, as well as for attacking and surveilling Palestinians, has sparked anger from rights campaigners and UN officials. In a report produced by UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese in July, several tech companies were accused of profiting from crimes including illegal occupation, apartheid, and genocide in occupied Palestine. The report referenced AI systems that were developed by the Israeli military to process and generate targets during the war on Gaza. There are reasonable grounds to believe Palantir has provided automatic, predictive policing technology, core defense infrastructure for rapid and scaled-up construction and deployment of military software, and its artificial intelligence platform, which allows real-time battlefield data integration for automated decision-making, the report said. In the report, Albanese called on UN member states to suspend all trade agreements and investor relations on any individuals or entities that endanger Palestinians. She added that the International Criminal Court and National Judiciary should pursue investigations and prosecutions of corporate executives and entities for their part in the commission of international crimes and laundering of the proceeds from those crimes. Off the rip, I really, really wish that the Tolkien estate could sue these boys into oblivion. The use of the term Palantir is, it's upsetting to anyone, of course, who genuinely loves The Lord of the Rings. And obviously, these guys are using it because they're all chuds who want to see themselves as the cool heroes and whatever. And I could go on so much about the way that the people, I already kind of did with Halo earlier, the way that the people will bastardize pop culture or literature and other things for their own gain. It's another form of capitalist exploitation of another person's work, and because they don't really understand the source material. But again, that's really not important to this article. But the Tolkien estate should, if they can, sue them into oblivion. Palantir, the company, is a sponsor of terrorism. Straight up. Their involvement in the pager bombings is unforgivable, and that was an open terroristic act. It was indiscriminate violence against a civilian population that was non-targeted and happened only to maim and instill fear. It's textbook terrorism, and got away with it. Nobody with any influence gave a shit that Israel was able to put explosives inside consumer electronics and distribute them across the world. Insane. And they chuckle about it, they laugh about it. They find it, Israelis and Israeli sympathizers find it incredibly amusing. Israelis have always been sick freaks who get off on violence, murder, and maiming. It's how their country can only exist in that. I mean, it's got such a huge population of child rapists for a reason. They just straight up do not value other human beings. It's a big part of their culture to, cheat and lie and steal and hurt other people as long as they can get away with it. Because of course they're white colonists. That's what they do. That's their entire MO. So that's not even getting into the fact that people relocated after October 7th, and then children who were moved out of the kibbutzim end up getting raped by Israelis in Israeli shelters. Like, it's insane. These people are disgusting. And so they cheer on the murder of humanitarian activist Rachel Corrie. There are even Israelis who cheered on the shooting at the Tree of Life synagogue because the victims weren't the right kind of Jew. Hamas, for the record, I've said this before, unilaterally condemned that shooting and were one of the first organizations to do so. And we can see that they have no value for life, and that they take immense pleasure in pain and destruction and of harm, in the fact that they call that operation, which they smuggled explosives into consumer goods in order to harm indiscriminate people, that they called it Operation Grim Beeper. It's a joke to them. They find it comedic and amusing, and they think that being able to do so means that they were able to abuse other people and harm them without consequences. Proves that they are better and that they deserve to do it because they got away with it. And the fact that everyone just let them, the UN put out condom, oh, you can't do this is bad, and then did nothing. The United States didn't even care. England didn't even care. France, I don't remember France caring at all. All of these countries that are supposed to be, progressive and moral or whatever against the evil barbaric hordes of the East, they don't give a shit about Israeli terror. Obviously, they don't give a shit because they benefit from it. For example, with their contracts with Palantir, Western tech, AI, data companies, just picking random people to be murdered, using it to develop programs that they can then sell to arms industries. They profit off war. These guys are war profiteers, and Israel gives them endless war to profit from. And that is why they exist, and that is why we continue to support Israel despite it being a disgusting stain on the human existence, rivaled only by the United States itself. So, these terrorist killers, as George Bush put it, can get away with whatever they want as long as we continue to let them. and as long as we continue to profit from them, which is the exact deal that they struck with Palantir. So that's all it is in the end. It's war profiteering, terror profiteering. Osama bin Laden was a rich developer and who became a terrorist. And, the guys who run Palantir are no different. They're rich tech developers who have become terrorists. Arguably, capitalists were always terrorists to begin with. That's an argument I would make. I don't have time to really get into that now, but I feel like if you're watching the show, you probably already have a general understanding of that anyway. Obviously capitalists are not all that concerned with the lives of human beings. If they wouldn't be capitalists. It's all about exploitation and theft, which is why big fans of Israel, which has been doing that to the Palestinians for decades now. And all that to point out that Hezbollah has been, since their inception, morally correct in their resistance to Israel and Western occupation of the Middle East. I'm not going to say Nasrallah was 100% correct every second he was alive, but as far as heroes of the modern age go, Nasrallah is pretty far up there, and he legitimately gave his life in the fight against U.S. terrorism and U.S. occupation, U.S. genocide, and U.S. brutality. And the pager attack, the terrorist, again, I'd like to make sure that's really emphasized that this was and could not be a targeted attack. This was an indiscriminate attack on the Lebanese people, who the perpetrators of whom completely got away with it with zero consequences whatsoever, and certainly none from the international community. He was absolutely in the right for resisting them and doing so until his last breath. Hezbollah exists to protect the Lebanese people and to liberate the Palestinian people from U.S. imperial clutches. And they are morally correct in doing so. And I'm always going to wish them the best of luck in that endeavor. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Sorry, comrades, there's too much news to cover in one go. Here are some additional short articles that we don't have time to discuss. Burkina Faso, another coup attempt thwarted, January 4th, 2026, via libya360.wordpress.com. Imperial-backed destabilization against a popular government. The alleged coup attempt reflects a familiar pattern in the global south. When a government challenges foreign control, military dependency, or neoliberal extraction, destabilization follows. The reported involvement of exiled elites, mercenaries, and suspected Western backing echoes decades of imperial interference in Africa. Former elites aligning with foreign interests against popular sovereignty. The accusation that former transitional President Paul-Henri Damiba coordinated the plot from abroad highlights how displaced ruling classes often become conduits for a counter-revolution, working with business interests and external powers to regain control over state institutions and resources. Mass popular mobilization as a defense against imperialism. The spontaneous turnout of thousands of Burkinabe civilians who protected President Ibrahim Traoré underscores where legitimacy truly lies, not in foreign capitals or exiled plotters, but among the people. This popular response reflects a broader revolutionary consciousness rejecting coups, mercenaries, and imperial domination. Judge blocks Trump effort to strip South Sudan deportation protections, December 30th, 2025, via Al Jazeera. Courts blocking deportation cruelty, not fixing the system. Federal judge had to intervene to stop Trump administration from stripping South Sudanese migrants of TPS, exposing how immigrant safety depends on fragile court orders rather than guaranteed rights. Without judicial resistance, the state is willing to deport people into famine, war, and humanitarian collapse. TPS targeted as part of a broader deportation regime. The attempt to end protections for South Sudan fit a wider strategy to dismantle TPS for working-class migrants from the global south, Syria, Haiti, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, regardless of ongoing violence or disaster. Temporary status becomes a tool of permanent insecurity and labor control. Imperial denial of responsibility for crisis conditions. By declaring South Sudan safe, the administration ignored UN findings of ongoing conflict, famine, and displacement, conditions shaped in part by global arms flows, climate crises, and imperial destabilization. The message is clear. U.S. power disclaims responsibility while forcing the most vulnerable to bear the consequences. ICE doesn't plan to detain Kilmar Abrego Garcia again as long as judges' order banning it stands. December 30th, 2025 via AP News. Immigration enforcement as political retaliation. Abrego Garcia's case shows how the state uses immigration and criminal prosecution as punishment when migrants successfully challenge government abuse. After a wrongful deportation embarrassed the administration, the Department of Justice officials suddenly treated an old, previously ignored traffic stop as a top priority, suggesting retaliation rather than justice. Presumption of guilt without evidence. Despite no criminal record and repeated denials, the government labeled Abrego Garcia as an MS-13 gang member, a familiar tactic used to dehumanize migrants and justify repression. This mirrors a broader system where accusation replaces due process, especially for working-class migrants. Courts as the last barrier against indefinite detention. The judge's orders blocking redetention highlight how ICE routinely seeks to cage people indefinitely without a viable deportation plan. Abrego Garcia's freedom exists only because of judicial intervention, underscoring how fragile immigrant rights are under an enforcement-first regime. State power protects itself, not people. Internal emails show high-level DOJ involvement in pushing charges after Abrego Garcia won at the Supreme Court, revealing a system more concerned with saving face and projecting toughness than fairness. This is carceral capitalism at work, punishment deployed to discipline dissent, migrants, and anyone who exposes state failure. Hey, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.